Welcome back welcome to the podcast T24 by Bumi Odulaja, which caters for various aspects of your life, either as a single or someone in a relationship that you're hoping that will lead to a marriage. Or even if you're a married person, there is something for you here. I will be sharing with you from my perspective as someone who is a certified counselor, coach, mentor, and also someone that's been married for almost 3 decades. So in this series, we've been talking about boundaries in marriage. Very important. So this is the 4th and final episode in this series. As a way of a recap, in the first 3 episodes, we covered physical, emotional, sexual, and financial boundaries within marriage. We also explored signs that your boundaries have been crossed or that you might have crossed the boundaries of your spouse. And the fact that there is a need to either set some boundaries or revisit and reset existing ones. So, in this episode, as I said, is the final episode in the series. We'll be focusing on how to set boundaries. Because I'm sure you're thinking, yes, we know it shouldn't have been violated. It has been violated, or I know I need to set it. How do I go about it? So I'll be talking to you and working alongside you on how you set boundaries in your marriage. How do you agree healthy boundaries in marriage? We have discussed, as I said before, why it is necessary to have boundaries. But some may feel boundaries might be unnecessary because your spouse already know who you are, they already know what you like and what you don't like. So what is the need to have boundaries? What is the need to sit down and set boundaries? But we have to keep in mind that boundaries doesn't always naturally come to all of us in the same way. And it might be harder for some people to set boundaries. Okay? So we're going to be looking at that some more today. With the knowledge that you have not acquired on the topic of boundaries in marriage, as well as why it is paramount for a healthy and successful marriage to have boundaries, I would like to invite you to pause for a few minutes, jot down how you might go about setting boundaries that you need in your marriage. Take a moment to do that. I appreciate that this might have not been easy for everybody to do, especially if you're not used to having boundaries in place. The task that you have just completed is a starting point, really. You can continue to think through what you need and what you want to accomplish by setting or reestablishing boundaries. You need time and space to reflect on what your predominant emotions are right now. Take a moment to think of that. Okay. It will also help you to be clear by naming what your emotions are, so that when you come to discussing this with your spouse, your request would appear more like a request and not a demand or a criticism. Before you sit down to discuss setting or reestablishing boundaries with your spouse, make sure you are clear on your own personal value, as well as your priorities. What are the no-go areas for you? What are the potential deal breakers for you? There might be a need for compromise, as boundaries mean different things to different people. You and your spouse must be willing to accept and respect each other's boundaries. So, go into the conversation with your heart to listen. Listen to understand and communicate. As an example, you might have a firm boundary line around finance. This might be something that have stemmed from your upbringing. However, be open to your spouse's point of view. They might provide a different perspective or even a compromise so that you can come to a new boundary line on finances. One that works for your relationship rather than a reaction to your lived experience. So, now that you're ready to sit down to agree boundaries, here are some tips for you. When you sit down to discuss boundaries with your spouse, bear these things in mind. Speak in a respectful manner. Make a request, not a demand. They're more likely to respond to you when you request rather than when you demand. We'll talk about that in my series on communication further. Don't assume that your spouse already know what your boundaries are. Boundaries must be communicated, must be discussed, and must be agreed. Remember, your spouse is not a mind reader. You need to be specific. Also, don't assume or guess your spouse's boundaries either. Ask them. Talk about their boundaries with them. Let them be clear to you what their boundaries are. Don't make assumptions. When you've sat down and you've discussed boundaries and you agree what those boundaries are, you must be a person of your word. Follow through on what you have agreed to do. You can invite a conversation with your spouse. You can reestablish the boundary lines, but you must keep to what you have agreed. Take responsibilities for your action. Marriage is big girls and big boys stuff. Remember, healthy boundaries don't come easy. Be open. Be patient with your spouse. Don't be surprised also if after a few days or few months, they regress in what they promised. Be fair to them. Give them the space to come back on track. It might take time to unlearn and adjust as they journey along with you. As we bring this to a close, if any of the things that we've said in the 4 episodes have triggered you in any way, or if you've experienced any of the violations that we talked about here, I would like to again encourage you to seek the support of trained counselors or speak to someone in your local church. I want to remind you and I want to encourage you to the fact that God ordained your marriage. It is very important not to damage the fabric of your marriage due to violation of the 4 or any of the 4 points that we talked about. We talked about emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, financial boundaries. These are just 4 of so many. So work on this with your spouse. And I've already given you some scriptures. key on those, work with those as you journey along with your spouse on this important area of marriage. Thank you very much for listening to the series Boundaries in Marriage by Bumi Odolaja. And I look forward to seeing you in a future series from T24 podcast by Bumi Odolaja. Thank you very much.